Welcome to another episode of Innovation and Insights. I'm your host, Hemang Shah, and today I have with me a very interesting personality who is doing amazing work in the field of innovation. We are fortunate to have with us Robyn Bolton, and Robyn is the founder, and I find this very interesting, founder and chief navigator at MileZero. It's a company which is focused on deriving profits out of innovation and insights. And prior to founding, MileZero, Robyn was also a partner at InnoSight, a company which was founded by the great Harvard professor Clayton Christensen. Where the world is somewhat of a less happier place since he passed away, but he's contributed so much to our world. And it's great that we have Robyn, who spent that time and learning about innovation, and now she's here to share her insights with us. So, Robyn, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So Robyn, maybe can you introduce yourself a bit more and share some more color with regards to your journey in the field of innovation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a great intro. And, as you can imagine, I've spent essentially my whole career in innovation, and very fortunate to have been able to do so. So my career actually started at Procter and Gamble. So I was in brand management at P&G at a time when the company was really investing in innovation. So by pure luck, I happened to be staffed on a new business development team. That's what it was called back in the day. And it was working on two new products, and I got to be a part of launching both of them. So one of them was Swiffer, and the other is Swiffer WetJet. And combined, the Swiffer brand now is $1 billion brand for
Wow.
P&G. So I was very fortunate to kind of be at the birth of $1 billion brand. I bear the scars of being there, but also the great stories and the great experience. So that was a very, very formative time in my career. After P&G, I moved up to Boston, got my MBA at Harvard. That's where I first came into contact with Professor Christensen. Then I went to work for the Boston Consulting Group, both in Boston and in Copenhagen, Denmark. And after a few years at BCG, moved over to InnoSight, which was Professor Christensen's firm, and spent about 9 years there, about half as a partner. And really, it was just such a wonderful learning experience in terms of seeing, the concepts of disruptive innovation, of jobs to be done, of business model innovation, all of these amazing things that have been written about, seeing them applied and kind of hearing about them and discussing them with, someone as wise and as kind as Clay. So was there, and then ultimately when the firm was acquired, decided to start my own firm and continue the work. And so that's what I do at MileZero.
That's such a terrific journey. And I think you used one word of you luckily found yourself in that spot. I don't think such opportunities just show up. I mean, there would have been something where, your management saw that belief in you. And of course, your own passion that led to you leading or, the start of billion-dollar brands. So kudos on your entire journey.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Robyn, I've always been fascinated by people who worked in this domain, and there is no easy way out. There's no cookie cutter approach that you can use to derive insights. Now, when you work on ambiguous problems, which is the start of most innovation journeys, how do you navigate from that ambiguous mess of, hey, here's what we want in terms of an outcome? And how do you take that and convert that into your origin point? That, like, how do you start looking at that problem from a fresh perspective yourself?
Yeah, it starts first with a deep breath, because I don't, personally, I don't like the ambiguity. I don't like the uncertainty. I don't like the chaos. But also my personality is like, okay, well, I don't like this situation, so I'm going to fix it. So that's kind of the deep breath. We're facing a lot of ambiguity. What do we do? And the first thing I always do, and I do this with my clients as well, is kind of define where we want to play, where we want to explore. Because there's a temptation, there's kind of, I think, an innovation myth of like, it should be unconstrained. We talk about the blue sky, we talk about the white piece of paper. And the fact is that creativity thrives within constraints. Because if anything's possible, then, you can spread yourself everywhere. But when you have constraints on you, now you have to think differently. And so the first thing I do is say, essentially, what are the constraints? And there always are. I've worked with companies that are like, oh, no, there are no constraints. And so I was working with, this was years ago, but I was working with The Economist, the newspaper, as they say. And so what are the constraints? They say, there are no constraints. I'm like, great. So you're interested in opening a retail store. If we find out that that's the right thing to do, they're like, why would we do that? I'm like, exactly. So there are constraints. So sometimes you have to throw something like that out there. Now, the interesting coda of that story is that several years ago, I was walking through the airport in Salt Lake City, and I passed an Economist store. They had licensed their name to one of the airport sort of, newsstands. So constraints can also be broken and challenged, but at least back when I was working with them, they were not interested in a store. That's great.
Yeah. So you start by looking at what are the bounding boxes, because and I don't like this term of think outside the box, because I'm like, okay, I don't really know what they mean when they say that. It just seems like they want to throw weird approaches that may not make sense in the real world. So you have to kind of look at, okay, what is the landscape that you're looking at? So is that where you try that? And is that a revenue goal necessarily, or is that because what people want out of innovation is not always clear?
Right.
For some, it's more like, hey, we want better ideas to come. And the next question is why? And I don't sometimes get a satisfactory answer to that. So, so how do you get to what is it that the people are looking for, which is maybe the management or the leadership in your interactions?
So when we're defining kind of that playground, we look at a lot of different dimensions of the business. So everything from certainly revenue, and I'll come back to that, revenue, profit, gross margin, all those financial metrics. We look at, geographies, where you want to operate. We look at the type of customers you want to serve. So we look at multiple aspects of the business. Revenue, I'm with you. You don't innovate. I mean, innovation is fun, don't get me wrong, but you don't innovate just to do it. You have scarce resources. So one of the other things that I do is work with companies to find what we call the growth gap, which is typically about revenue or profit, and saying, all right, you have a business, you project it to grow at a certain amount, but you've probably also made promises to investors, to the public markets, around where you'll be in a certain number of years. And there is always a gap between the promise that has been made and where you see the company going if it just continues as it is, growing organically. And that gap between the two is your growth gap. And that's what innovation needs to deliver. And you're right. Most people, if you say kind of what revenue do you need from innovation, they're like, oh no, we want more ideas, like you said, or we want the, and it's like, well, no, you actually have a pretty, quantifiable, significant amount of revenue or profit that you need to get from things that don't exist today. Let's name it, let's, size it, and let's talk about it, because that's the only way that you're going to start making progress towards that goal.
I like that concept, the growth gap. I think it's is it quantifiable? Like in your journey, like you try to always quantify it?
Yeah. So I did this again with a client, and they were extremely. This was a client that had innovation in their culture, in their DNA, and they're like, "Oh, we're fine." I'm like, "Let's just this is math." So this is very simple math. Let's just humor the consultant. And I was like, you guys have promised to be, I forget the numbers, you promised to be this number. You do your strat plan every year, the number you promised minus the number you've projected. I'm like, you have this amount of gap. And they're like, yeah, no problem. we can do that. And I was like, this is 2 Facebooks. You have to create 2 Facebooks in the next 5 years. And their eyes just popped out of their head. I'm like, yes. So what is your plan to create 2 Facebooks? And that's when they're like, oh, like, okay. Now we're focused. Now we're talking.
So I think this was covered in the book. I believe it was Good to Great, the B
Mhm.
hack, which is the big, hairy, audacious goal, right?
Yep.
Which sounds again like nice and fun to shoot for, but when you quantify it, you're like, okay, this is a really
Yeah.
hairy project that we are after.
Yep.
And I guess the next piece after that is, how do you know that the teams you're working with are committed to reaching that goal?
Yeah. That I think really is the key question. And it's typically the teams are committed. And I say this with a lot of kindness and a lot of empathy, it's the leaders who are not. And one of the things that I've come to realize over my career is that innovation is not an idea problem. It's a leadership problem. Every company companies are filled with people, and people are filled with ideas. So there are more ideas in your company than you could possibly act on. What's getting in the way are, the executives, are the managers, and they get in the way for a lot of extremely logical reasons. And, it's because they're being asked to deliver today's business and invest scarce resources in delivering, on something that should, may not, could fill that growth gap. And ultimately, there's always a point, usually several points in an innovation project where a leader has to kind of confront that, like, I have scarce resources. I only have so many people or so much budget. And, I know we have this BHAG. I know we have this great goal, but if I spend, $1 on that, I may not get anything from it. And if I get a return, I may not be in this role anymore. So it benefits someone else. Whereas if I spend that dollar on this thing over here on the current business, I know what I'll get from it. I know when I'll get the return, and it will benefit me and my business. And that tension is really hard. And that's really kind of when the leaders have to confront whether they're committed or not. And that's usually the point where, things get tough, I'll say.
So do you try to show them on one side, if you invest this in an innovation project, here is the ROI you're looking at, but
Yeah.
it may take time, it may take resources, and there's a fair amount of unknowns. So are you the one playing the, sometimes the advocate and sometimes the devil's advocate, right? Are you the one doing that,
Yep.
or you leave it up to the management to sort it out?
I try not to leave it up to the management to sort it out. And that's really where you mentioned you liked my title of Chief Navigator. That really is where that comes into play, is sitting alongside the leader who is the driver and saying, all right, here are the options, and, like, let's talk through them, and helping them think through things, helping them see, see things that they may not see, supporting them as they make tough decisions, and really kind of be that guide alongside them through those really, really tough moments.
And I think that's where the true value of someone who's an innovation strategist comes into the picture. It's not just the idea that, hey, I'm going to help you run good ideation sessions or brainstorming
Yeah.
sessions. That to me is the more easy and the fun part.
Yeah.
It can be driven by others as well.
Yeah.
But this idea of navigating to what is it that we are really after, that
Yeah.
starts the innovation project. And this is what I wanted to discuss with you, because people
Yeah.
are like, hey, let's get into a design thinking cycle. And I'm like, we don't just start that way. It takes a fair amount of things. Let's just, get on the same page. And
Yes.
And before we do this entire exercise, so thank you for
Yep.
sharing all this, Robyn. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
So,
you're so wise to say you have to get on the same page first. A lot of people skip that step, so it's important.
so let's, I guess, take one more step forward, which is okay. After you've got the buy-in, and
Mhm.
you have a you have a fair idea of where you want to go. Is that the point where you start the empathy session, which is, or section, which is looking at who the customers are, who the users are? Is that when you start that, or you already have this information uh, at this stage?
Uh, so it's definitely where I start. And those two things of like kind of getting the alignment, getting the support, checking the boundaries. It's an ongoing conversation because, things change as you learn more. Um, but once we have at least a somewhat solid foundation, that's when we start the insights. And I'll be honest, that's my favorite part of the innovation process is going out and talking to people because people are so fascinating.
Mhm.
And empathy interviews, when done right, and I've seen empathy interviews done poorly. um, Empathy interviews, when done right, they're conversations. When they're done poorly, they're interrogations. So sitting down and just having a conversation with someone, and jobs to be done, which was one of the foundational
Yeah.
theories and tools that Clay used, I find to be so powerful because it says, like, yes, there are these functional jobs to be done, these functional problems or progress that people have, and those are like very tangible, logical things. They're often the first thing that comes up when you're doing an empathy interview because those are the things that are easier to talk about. What drives behavior are the emotional and social jobs to be done. So how you want to feel, your emotions, your motivations, your aspirations, your insecurities, and how you want to be perceived by others. And those drive behavior. As I say, we decide with our heart and we justify with our heads. And empathy interviews, when done well, get into those social and emotional jobs, and it's just fascinating.
Uh, I have to agree with you that the customer discovery process is a really fascinating time because you learn so much, and I,
Mhm.
I selfishly take a lot of pride in it because it shows me what my blind spots are, and it
Yep.
shows also the levels of my own ignorance. So I think that is the best part of any such project for me. That, and I guess the one after that, which is the brainstorming part. But
Yeah.
in between those two is where I'm like, oh, I think I don't know if I want to go further, which is which problem are we picking, that is worth solving, or which
Yeah.
problem will get us there. So, what are some of your approaches?
Yeah. I feel the same way. I kind of joke there's, um an old sign. Maybe it's from Disney World, I don't know, but it says abandon hope, ye who enter here. And that's how I feel when the empathy interviews are done and it's time to do that synthesis and picking the problem. It's like, oh, this part is going to be so hard. And like, we have to go through it, but the kind of that first moment of like, just abandon all hope, ye who enter here, because this is going to be tough. And so I find that, again, starts with a deep breath, mustering courage. And then really kind of putting all of the insights just out, out on a whiteboard, a wall, whatever it is, and try to take like just taking it all in because I've taken it in, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. And so now it's time to like kind of step back and try to see the big picture and essentially try to do clustering. What are the common things we heard? What are one of the tools with jobs to be done is looking at the importance and the satisfaction of a job. So how important is a job? And usually my proxy for that is like, has it come up a lot? Because if somebody mentions a job to be done often and multiple people mention it, then like it's top of mind. but how satisfied is it? And the key is to try to find those jobs, those needs, those wants that are important and unsatisfied, because that means that's where there's pain and where people are actively looking to change what they're currently doing.
Okay.
And so trying to hone in on those things while keeping in mind, like, what are the things we can't sacrifice on? And so it's that in and of itself is a very creative, iterative process um, that takes time. But I've always found that, like, you know, eventually you get to a point where, like, you kind of do have an aha moment where suddenly you see things starting to fit together. Call it like when you see the matrix, you're like, there it is. But it does, it takes time, and it can be frustrating because it's so iterative.
So at this point, I'm guessing you're discussing these insights, the clustering. You're trying to make a case for these are the needs people are looking for,
Yep.
and you're also trying to make a case for things that they're not expressing. They can't
Yes.
say it aloud, but you're like, they're saying this, but they really mean that.
Yeah.
And you're trying internally, or you're trying to make a case for that. But I have to imagine it can't always be the case where everyone agrees. Yes, the customer is saying this, but they want something else.
Yep. Yeah. No. And at this part of the process, it's differences of opinion are, yeah, it's fine because we're still in an exploratory phase. And so typically then what happens is, we go into a brainstorming session and we're brainstorming on a lot of things, because we have what we think, the team thinks the data says, and then we have other people who maybe have, passion around certain ideas or need states. So we take all of that into the brainstorming session and, brainstorm around multiple different need states, multiple different jobs to be done, come out with concepts, and then it's back to customers, it's back to consumers, and showing them concepts and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And again, it's the voice of the customer who helps us, narrow down. And, there are times that we're surprised in something that we didn't see in the research, but somebody else, had passion for, really emerges as something that could be huge. And then there are other times where, like, yeah, we knew that from the research. So, it's the constant kind of iteration and conversation with customers to help, both check our thinking, but then also kind of keep us moving forward and continue to focus us on where the biggest opportunities are.
So this can get into multiple iterative loops in and of
yeah.
itself. You put a time bound on it. That's like, do you say that, hey, we're going to spend a week on this thing, or like, how do you make sure that you don't get into this analysis paralysis state?
Yes. So I love a good Gantt chart. I love a good project plan. Because I think you do need to time bound things. You can get into analysis paralysis. You can also get into a state where, again, someone has so much passion for an idea that they want to keep researching until their idea gets confirmed. But typically, the leader, the most senior executive, there is a deadline. Like, we only have money for the next quarter, or we need to launch this. Usually it's like, well, we need to launch a business by, in 2 years. And then you work backwards from that and you say, okay, so you always have some time bound, and it's important to respect that. I mean, that's another constraint that drives creativity.
And then there's the other piece of it, which is you learn these insights and you said, this is the problem that on solving will address the growth gap, right? And therein, I would expect that the management may sometimes have a different take. The leadership may because they might have done some analysis themselves. They're like, hey, we have this certain product line, and if we keep adding these incremental features or hooks to it, we will get there, or we may not close the gap, but we'll be on our journey. So how do you reconcile their understanding or their assumptions versus
Yep.
what the actual customers are showing you?
Yep. So it's a couple things. One is usually the growth gap. I have yet to see a time when the growth gap can be closed by what continuously improving what is currently done. Mostly because we like to make big promises.
Yeah.
But that still comes up in conversations of like, well, again, well, we could spend this money on improving this product line and we're guaranteed to get improvement. Whereas if we spend this money on this new thing, we may get nothing. And again, that's the tension. The other thing that that I'm always telling teams and leaders is you need to take a portfolio approach. I mean, the best we look to VC to venture capitalists as kind of a model for investing. They don't invest in one thing and cross their fingers. They have a portfolio. They know that the majority of things in their portfolio aren't going to pay out. They know that a minority will, they'll make their money back, and they're kind of banking on one big one, one unicorn. And that's the exact same approach that a company needs to take with innovation. Is there is no silver bullet. There is no like, oh, like we have this one idea and it's going to change everything. And we know after 3 months that this is going to earn you $1 billion. Like that is what most executives want, to be fair. And it doesn't happen. So how can we take a portfolio approach, a portfolio that includes different types of innovation, that includes improving your existing product lines, and continues to kind of push into addressing those new need states, addressing those new and emerging jobs to be done. So you kind of need to have that. You definitely need to have that portfolio approach to fill the growth gap.
I love that philosophy because I work a fair bit with startups, and you're right. It's not that one startup is going to solve all the problems. It may take 10 of them to look at insights in a particular area, and then one of them may break the wall, and
Yep.
that will lead to a flood of other folks who will provide a lot of value, and
Yes.
in that process they'll make money as well. But yes, that portfolio approach, I love how you framed it that way, because when you're not doing these projects for just an incremental growth, you're doing
Mhm.
it to maybe start an entirely new product line, and
Yep.
and the cost is you don't know, how much time it will take for it to work.
Yep. Exactly. And things will hit bumps and there will be setbacks, which is why you need to, going back to your first question, like you need to have a revenue goal, a quantifiable goal that everybody understands, because is what will keep the support pulling you forward when you do hit those bumps.
So, Robyn, I want to switch the gears up a little bit, because
Yeah.
one side is we have these innovation projects that, let's say you do a fantastic journey into deriving the best customer insights possible.
Mhm.
You get the best approach of, whether it's jobs to be done, whether it's discovering latent needs. You found the
Mhm.
best problem which is to be solved, but getting there can take time. And
Yep.
we live in the TikTok generations. What this discussion, can be, let's say, 1 hour, but ultimately people need a 30-second reel about it.
Yep.
Uh, and one of the interesting questions I've been probing is the use of generative AI, because I have all these tools at my disposal. So why not I take all these customer insights and feed it to any of these tools, and it will output the best problem statement for me to solve. Why don't I even give that problem statement and ask it to do the ideation by itself? Because
Mhm.
thereby I don't have the need for a team. So,
Yep.
and there is some merit to that line of thinking as well. Now,
Mhm.
where do you think we are headed as an, I guess, an innovation ecosystem with these tools?
Yeah. So personally, I think AI is awesome. It's an amazing, amazing tool. I think it is absolutely fantastic for helping you get a head start. It is a starting point, not an ending point. And so, I myself, I've used it in working with teams, and it is incredible what AI can produce in terms of insights. But the thing I've consistently seen is that like AI, it's large language learning models, all that. So it can only tell you what is known.
True.
And, especially for, the more kind of radical or even adjacent innovation, you need to discover, like you said, those latent needs, those things that people don't know or that people don't talk about. And AI can't tell you that because it's not in its model. So what I found AI to be fantastic at is giving me kind of the 80% of stuff that is known. When I go talk to someone, the 80% of stuff I probably could have guessed before we ever sat down. And that's great. Great to have that great starting point, because now I can focus the conversation on the 20% that nobody knows and digging that out. And, as I've seen, 100% of the insights that drive innovation come from that 20%. So what it does is it helps me kind of more quickly get to that 20% in conversation. And it helps me spot that 20%, because if it's something that the AI didn't tell me, that may be something that is new or unknown at this point. So, like I said, I think AI is a fantastic tool. I think it will make things more efficient, but you still need humans because you're innovating for humans, and we're fascinating and weird and illogical.
Yeah, I think to understand our weirdness, I think that's the true human potential which is required there, which is
Yep.
like uh, so so if I'm an innovator, I want to get better at my own game. I
Mhm.
have these tools at my disposal. What can I do to get better at spotting these things that a tool is not able to give me answers? Like how do I know where to look?
Yeah. So if basically if and there's a lot you can do with prompts. The guidance I give folks is start there, do the prompts, ask it to play the role of, something, ask it to, there's so many great, again, jobs to be done tools or empathy maps, um, business model canvas. There are so many great tools out there that you can ask AI to, hey, build a business model map for this type of business, or hey, build an empathy map for this type of person. Take that, do that work. And, I built 4 personas for a client in an hour and a half. So you can go really, really fast, but then you take that output and then you go talk to people and you go do the empathy interviews. And, what happens is, like, I write guides differently so that, the stuff that AI has told me, it's a quicker part of the conversation because I'm just kind of checking it. And I spend more time probing in other areas. So take the output, spend a couple hours getting it, take it, and then go out into the real world and talk to people.
Yeah. So not to be taken just at pure face value, do your own research, do your own validation that, okay, these things are checking, but
Yep.
some other areas are unexplained.
Yep.
And that's where you may have to, again, devote more time and maybe, risk the idea that, hey, you don't know everything, and
Yep.
and learn from, the customers or the users.
Yep. And it's time well spent because, like you said, we're kind of the TikTok generation. Everybody, nobody has time for long things. We want everything in a soundbite. And I guarantee, as much as you think about your customers, you have internal customers. You have those decision makers, your bosses, and they are still more convinced by a video clip of, a story that a customer tells, or, a sound bite of somebody actually talking, than they are if you go and be like, hey, ChatGPT said this. They're going to be like, also you risk that. Well, if ChatGPT can tell me that, why do I need you? Don't open the door for that conversation. They will be convinced by humans use AI to just kind of help you get to humans faster.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I like your suggestions of having it do, I guess, the the rounding of the perspectives. You can ask it to, like I'm thinking aloud, because you can say, okay, I want to use the six hats thinking approach, and
Yep.
I might be naturally inclined along one or two hats based on my personality, but these other four hats, they may not come. Well, I would have to probably fake, some of those personality aspects.
Yep.
But either of these Gen AI tools, they could do a much better job at that.
Yes. Yeah. So it's, learning the prompts, and there's so many great prompt guides out there, and, Medium, it's a great source of things. So like spend time kind of assembling your library of prompts. And again, the time you invest in getting a prompt right is time well spent, because you can keep using that,
Yeah.
project after project. So, it's worth the time investment, but like you said, use the tools that are already out there, the thinking hats, the canvases, things like that as part of your prompt.
And ultimately, the stakeholder management. I mean, until then, I think to convince them, you have to convince yourself, which means that you have to, AI can probably get you stuck in a pool of shallow water, but I think
Yep.
the real value is extracted when you dig deep. And
Yes.
uh, so, thank you, thanks so much. I think for this discussion, Robyn. I think we can go on and on, in this
We
journey.
could.
It's such a fascinating area, and the way you explain it's so much implementable. So I really thank you for bringing out those insights. And one
My
key trend
pleasure.
which I spotted is that before you dig into innovation projects, maybe pick up meditation. You may have to go on multiple deep breaths.
Yes. There's a
It's
lot
going
of
to help
deep
things
breathing
out.
involved.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, no, but overall, I think it helps you become a bit more objective, because the as innovation leaders or as strategists, you have to be open to contrarian opinion.
Hmm.
I think to get ourselves in the best frame of mind to be objective about it, I think deep breaths are the best fix for that.
Yes. No, as a previous coach of mine said, creative and reactive are spelled using the same letters, but they're very different mindsets. And so, you kind of have to say, like, am I in a creative mindset or a reactive mindset? Because all the parts are the same, but it's how I put the parts together. So I've, at least for me, the deep breaths of being like, okay, I'm scared about what's about to happen, which means I'm reactive, but I need to be creative. So deep breaths and we'll get there.
I think let's pause our conversation on that wonderful note. Let's choose to be
Yes.
creative using multiple deep breaths. So thanks
There
so
you
much,
go.
Robyn. Thank you.
Thank you.